Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So in this video, I'm going to explain how the SHSAT works. This is the first year that it's transitioning from a paper test to an online adaptive test. So I'm just going to go over, how the test is broken up and the changes that have recently been brought in. Okay, so first, let's just quickly talk about the old practice test. And the reason this is relevant is because most of the material out there right now, most of the practice problems you're going to come across are going to be practice problems that were used for these old tests. They were built for this paper test, which had 57 ELA questions and 57 math questions. And, you took it on paper, regardless of how you did on a question, you'd get the same next question afterwards. So, it's not like what you get these days on practice tests will not be representative of what you might get on an online version. But basically, the key parts of the old paper test are that, you had a paper booklet and an answer sheet. Almost every question was MCQ, except for you had a few at the beginning of the math section, which were open answer. And, you had the same fixed amount of questions. You had a raw score, which was pretty straightforward to convert into, a scale score out of 800. And there are actually quite a few good online converters, so that I find to be fairly reliable. If just don't get me wrong, it's a great way to practice, right? Taking these paper tests are still great. The content is the same. There's no big major content change. Everything that was on the paper test is what you are still expected to know for the online test. So they are a great resource, but you just need to be aware that, the test is different now. The only thing is the time stays the same. So you still will have 180 minutes, 3 hours on the adaptive test, just like you did on the paper test. Okay, so let's just talk about what the two sections of the test are. So first we have the ELA section, and this is kind of broken up into two main categories, I would say, which is the grammar part and reading comprehension, and then you have the more like analytical part. So in the first part, you're going to be analyzing grammar, so like comma splices, all sorts of different, grammatical errors, replacing sentences, and then you're also going to have things like, which word best fits here, which transition best fits here, and then you're going to have stuff like what sentence, where should I put this new sentence? So it's going to be very like structural, more grammatical things. And then the second half is going to be more like understanding. So they're going to give you a passage, they're going to get you to read it, then they're going to be like, what is the author saying here? What is the tone? What is the main point? Things like that. So it's more like thinking. Now math is going to be pretty much the same thing. There's no like set structure to it. The only thing is at the very start of the test, you are going to have a few short responses, which you fill in. They have to be numbers, so there's not going to be any like variables or anything that would be an answer choice. But you did have just, numbers and then like 52, 53 or so MCQ questions. So it was very straightforward. It covered algebra, probability, geometry, data analysis, things like that. Everything we've been covering so far. Okay, so like I said, there's going to be grammar and conventions like punctuation, agreement, sentence boundaries, all that stuff, although that is a fairly small part of the test. And then there's going to be inference and evidence, organization and clarity, vocabulary and context. And another thing is that a lot of times these questions will combine multiple different topics at the same time. So or within passages, right? So you could have a passage and one question asks you about the tone, and then another question asks you about the grammar, and then another question asks you to infer something, and then another question asks you about a vocabulary word, right? So it's going to be kind of mixed. And then there could be individual questions where they're testing different skills to kind of try and throw you off. And so you just have to, be ready for this. You know what they're looking for, you know what they're trying to test you on, and just be ready for those types of questions because they do repeat. We've covered, I believe, all of them, so these should not surprise you. And then regarding math, like it says here, it makes sense to set up. You have time, you have an hour and a half per section on average. You should, label your prompt, label the questions, underline things that would confuse you. Always underline what the question is actually asking so you don't get confused. Make sure units are consistent. Write out equations. Always, if there's a geometry context or something where you can draw a little graph or like a number line or something, that is always helpful. At least for me, it helps visualize things. Always calculate, and if you can, double check in another way. So either by plugging the value back in or by solving a different way, but try and double check. At the same time, if you are running out of time, there are certain strategies that you can do to minimize the amount of times you're spending on questions. So you can take educated guesses, limit it down to 2 options, label stuff that you're unsure about that you want to circle back to. And of course, a lot of this changed with the new adaptive test, but while practicing, this is stuff you should be doing. Okay. So now let me explain what happened in the adaptive test. So first of all, the paper test was 57 questions in each section. That has now been brought down to 50, but the time still stayed the same. So you are actually gaining a bit more time per question. Now, the only thing is now, if you get a question right, the difficulty will go up. If you get a question wrong, the difficulty will go down. So what this means is that you also can't go back, right? So if once you answer a question, you can't go back to change it at the end, because the computer calculates what the next question will be based on the previous question. So you can't, mark stuff for review or things like that, like stuff that would be done previously. You could also be getting topics that you might not know as well. We don't know what they're going to be putting on here as well as we do with the paper ones, because this is very new, right? So we've had less experience with this. We don't know exactly how accurate the online graders are yet, because there just isn't that much to go off of, right? They've only released 2 official practice tests and like a guidebook and stuff. So there isn't a lot of material out there. So it's very hard to really know, right? So don't get stressed if you feel like you see something new that you haven't seen before. That's probably actually a good sign. It means that they're testing you on stuff that's beyond your knowledge, so it probably means you're doing pretty well. And now while you're studying, just, take everything with a grain of salt. You always should have, but now more so than ever, right? Understand that these, score predictors and stuff are not always super accurate, especially now. Other than that, you can now decide what section you want to start with. So you can either start with English or math. However, you can't go back and forth between them, right? Because it's adaptive. So once you choose a section, you have to stay on that section. And of course, all the answers are going to be inputted on a computer, which means that they also have new question types. So they're going to have multi-select, they are going to have graphs, where interactive graphs, you can plot things. So there is a lot more, there's going to be a lot more variability with these question types. And you should just be ready for that, because up until now, it's been mostly multiple choice. So just make sure that you are ready for that. And yeah, of course, your adaptive does not mean random, right? Like I said, if you get a question right, then the question will be harder. And obviously, I don't know if you've heard of the SAT and things like that, but you can't get a really good score on this SHSAT, I promise you, if you don't do well on the adaptive section. Regardless of how well you're doing, you need to be getting a lot of things correct, and you need to be doing this at a high difficulty. Of course, if you get a few questions wrong, no big deal, but just make sure that you are ready for this adaptiveness, that you handle this pressure well, that you don't struggle with this. And okay, so there are also, because it's going to be online, digital, there are going to be a lot of new tools that you can use. So you can highlight things, you can bookmark, you can use line readers to read things closer, you can eliminate answer choices, you can use a notepad and an equation editor, and all these different things. So just make sure to be taking advantage of this stuff. You will also have paper and pencils, so you can just go the old-fashioned way. But just make sure that you are coming into the test prepared, knowing how the test experience will be, knowing what will happen, and just overall just feeling prepared and ready. So of course, your raw and scaled scores are not interchangeable. The raw score you get, like I said, can be different. You can get the same raw score, but a very different scaled score because of the way the test works. So for example, the test prioritizes doing really well in a subject. So if I were to get a 56 out of 57 in math and then a 40 out of 57 in English, I would get a much higher score than if I got, let's say, 48s on both sections. Okay, so this test prioritizes doing really well in one section and doing okay in the other. So what you do want to do, and I know this kind of might go against your common sense, is to actually really study that section that you are better at. Of course, still make sure that your other section is improving, but you really want to hone in on that one section that you know you can get up to that few points, because those last few questions really make a big difference. And of course, now with the online tests, things could be different. They could have changed the formula. No one really knows exactly how they calculate. Everyone has a sort of basic idea, but it's better to do really well in one section than to do okay on both. And so, yeah, you just need to be able to know the content, know the platform, and know the scoring. There are a few good scoring websites out there. Just search up SHSAT scaled score converter. You'll find a bunch of them. And yeah, and another good resource is I have a website, SHSAT Specialist. If you go to that, there are a bunch of adaptive tests, a bunch of practice questions, and obviously, like I just said, no one really knows what is going to be on this adaptive test perfectly, but everyone's trying, and it's definitely a good resource. So look online, see what you can find, and you've got this.